Okay, so the Raw after WrestleMania now, which was an interesting one, which was a sellout again. Ken Shamrock and Steve Blackman beat Farouk and Rocky Maivia in just over 4 minutes when Maivia walked out and Shamrock pinned Farouk after a belly-to-belly, not using the ankle lock because, of course, top baby faces, which Farouk is being set up for, would never quit. Apparently, that's an old rule that WWF had. I've got to say, it's not something I ever noticed, but yeah, apparently there was an old rule, Matt, that your baby face, they never quit. So don't make him as quitters. Maybe it was an old slogan, never quit. Who knows?
It's still one that they still do kind of roll with today when you think of John Cena.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. I suppose you're dead right there. Now I know about it, I'm sure I'll look at that more and more. Okay, it's also around this time as well on Raw where Jim Cornette brings out Dan Severn as the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. And there's a whole big background here, and you know, they're bringing up different things on the interviews from Jim Ross, bringing up how he's beaten Shamrock, and Ross noted that Shamrock's beaten him in a suit and tie Midnight Express sort of angle. Really, that's how it looks, and it comes across apparently with Cornette doing all the talking. It seems at this point, Matt, that obviously I think there's no hidden secret here that Dan Severn has a mouthpiece in Jim Cornette, and they've kind of done that very deliberately, maybe not to have him going out on the mic. Maybe they didn't feel he was going to be comfortable at this point, but I suppose the plan is here, Matt, that Severn eventually, they want to kind of refuel that feud from the UFC into WWF, and they want this whole Severn Shamrock thing to finally pay off, because it seems like they've gone for a hell of a long way to get this done at that point, Matt, in terms of getting Cornette with him as well.
Yeah, I can definitely see why they'd be aiming for this, you know. And, you know, it would be good to see something like that, because in the UFC, everything's unpredictable, and, like, as we know, like, the results, like, totally unpredictable on any days. Like, anything could go the wrong way. Mm-hmm. But in WWF or WWE, you know, they could really shape this match and shape this feud and, you know, put some real exposure on it, like draw some UFC fans over to the WWE, and then like show them, you know, that you can just see a match in a different way, and that they can actually plan it and shape it and mould it to actually go the distance, like put on their, and then who knows where it would have ended up in the end. You know, I would have loved to see this culminate at a pay-per-view.
Sure, yeah, we'll get to that. Okay, so WWF hit the European tour, which of course is kind of like it always seemed to happen after WrestleMania. I mean, it's still to this day, it's kind of like a familiar thing. They always go on the European trip or the UK. But this time they hit with Shamrock, at least. He's doing all the Germany. He's gone on that tour. They're touring in Berlin and Hamburg and all over the place there. And the program pretty much is that Ken Shamrock is he's teaming up with Owen Hart again. There seems like WWF kind of, I don't know if they were trying to position these two as a tag team, or they felt like Owen Hart probably at this point, given the whole kind of Hart Foundation, you know, what happened with Brett. I don't know if this kind of like, hey, we need something here for Owen, and these two may be a good combination. They were trying to, you know, test these guys out. There was another time as well where not only was he teaming with Owen on the tour, but he also, for one night only, he does team up with Cactus Jack at the time, beating Rocky Maivia and D'Lo Brown. So he's very much involved on that tour. Here's a report then in the end of April here from the Wrestling Observer, is that Ken Shamrock suffered an injury and is out of action with a sprained ankle. And either strained or torn ligaments in the ankle suffered while doing a pull-apart brawl on the 13th of the 4th Raw show from Philadelphia. Shamrock was out of action this week and is not expected to return at the pay-per-view show on the 26th of the 4th, although that was pending a doctor's examination to the actual extent of the ankle damage. So, yeah, not good news there at the end of April for Shamrock. Certainly going into the next pay-per-view in all that. And believe it or not, Shamrock would still participate at Unforgiven. So, WWF Unforgiven, Matt, sure these names are all familiar now with everybody. This is when they started to sort of come out of the in-your-house type stuff, and then they started giving them these names, and they sort of become yearly kind of things for a while. At the show, Farouk and Ken Shamrock team up together with Steve Blackman, and they take on D'Lo Brown, Mark Henry and Rocky Maivia. So this is, of course, post Farouk leaving the Nation of Domination, kind of getting kicked out, if you will. So he's over as a babyface. Yeah, the match itself, it wasn't overly impressive. Reports Meltzer, but it wasn't bad. There was a sloppy Dominator in it, apparently, from Farouk, but it seemed like it was more about the whole. I think that they tried to keep Shamrock away from doing too much in the match due to his injury, but it seemed more about the whole Farouk Rocky Maivia storyline than anything else. Okay, some notes now from the 27th of April here, which the live show started with Ken Shamrock and Owen Hart as a tag team versus the Nation of Domination. However, Hart turned on Shamrock and they stomped around him. This angle was done to give Hart a new angle, since they had kind of let him flounder as a face, and explained Shamrock being gone since his torn ligaments. So I think this was a way to get him out as well, out of TV for a while and let him heal up. So they obviously done this. Matt, obviously slight disappointed that we wouldn't have got to see Shamrock and Owen Hart, but as a tag team, what do you think that would have been like? I mean, would that have been something that would have could have got somewhere more than it was given?
I don't know, it would have been one of those very contrasting tag teams, wasn't it, that we see quite a bit now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not too sure how far they would have gone though. I'm not too sure this would have been another case of those things where like they have two talented guys that they're not doing much with in singles competition at the moment. Would they just throw them together and hope that it gelled, and then like maybe the tag team titles would follow? But I can't say that at the time when I was watching it, it was something that I was like on the edge of my seat for.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they would have been a great tag team though. Yeah,
sure. So Shamrock obviously misses a lot of TV. He's not working any house shows, obviously, and he's taking time. It's worth noting around this time, Jim Cornette's angle with Dan Severn was all over within a couple of months, Matt, believe it or not. A decision was made to get Severn away from Cornette for whatever reason. And they injured Cornette to explain the absence from TV for a few weeks while he went on vacation. Neither Cornette nor Severn knew of the angle until the night that it was done, and the explanation given was that Vince Russo had given McMahon a list of faces and all the heels on the roster, and by saying that it shows that every statement made in the press about WWF getting rid of face heel concept is totally out of the window. I think basically what happened is they had too many than the other, so they had to do something about that. And then obviously Severn now is kind of being teed up as a babyface, which is obviously very bizarre. So now I want to skip ahead here, and we're going to make it to May the 25th, 1998. Shamrock, interestingly here, Matt. Okay, so obviously he's not participating at UFC, but he turns up at a UFC event on May the 25th. Meltzer reports it was interesting to see the reaction to Ken Shamrock appearing at his first UFC since signing with the WWF. Mostly in a wheelchair while the camera was on him. Get this, Matt, to sell the angle. Now, when do we ever see that ever again? To that extent, they go there in a freaking wheelchair just to make sure they know he's definitely injured. If only things were done like that. So obviously that's to keep in the angle with Owen Hart. Shamrock was interviewed on the show, mainly plugging his new book, and again brought up that he's been injured more in pro wrestling than he was in UFC. There was some question whether he'd be greeted with the ignorant "you sold out" reaction, since the martial arts community among people who don't understand real life, some fans were quick to claim that he had. Instead, the reaction was largely cheering, with fans understanding there is more money in the WWF, and it didn't seem that even though the audience couldn't be called smart, they were smart enough to understand that the reality of the business decision. It's reporting that night as well that Frank Shamrock is 4-1 and retains the UFC middleweight title, beating Jeremy Horn that night. And another interesting fact here for you: this night of the UFC in particular, Chuck Liddell made his debut. His first match, 1-0 that night. So yeah, we all know where he went on to in the world of UFC especially. Okay, so more news as well for MMA. Seems like we're covering MMA quite largely in this month. Dan Severn would be headed back to, it wasn't a UFC match, it was like an MMA kind of thing, and upped his record to 21-2 at the time, with another victory over former super heavyweight kickboxing champion Kevin Rusa in 1 minute with a choke. So obviously WWF would have been happy with that one, but that must have been some sort of deal that they'd worked out before. The WWF reluctantly only had one chance, and it was foolproof, to turn Dan Severn into a money player that would be to have him destroy people and be a pro wrestler, but outside as well. So this seems like they're trying to do an angle here with Severn now, the way they're trying to, I guess it's kind of like how they use Brock similar now. They're trying to make him into that. Obviously, we know it didn't get to anywhere near the heights it needed to, but that's obviously what they're going for. So here we hit June 98 now, and we've got another fun fact here. This one will make you laugh, Matt. The contracts with I'm sure you remember the Nitro girls, Matt, from Nitro. Oh yeah. Well, WCW made a complete muck up by the sounds of it. The contracts with the Nitro girls are all coming due right now. WCW has missed the boat so far, not putting out a Nitro girls calendar or merchandising them more heavily. They've lost a lot of money and they're not re-signing, so they didn't do too well there. But interesting point that Vince McMahon did not snap them up either, which is surprising around that time especially. So yeah, that's where we are with that one. Okay, so moving on, and we've got an interesting article here that the New York Times ran a lengthy story on the 24th of the 5th on Mike Tyson's lawsuit, and this is another fun fact, by the way, everybody, against Don King. In the story, Tyson's foray into pro wrestling was examined. Basically, despite all the money Tyson earned from boxing, he went on a spending spree in 1995, buying 10 BMWs, 4 Rolls Royces, several Bentleys, and spent, yes, Matt, $11 million on a home.
Wow.
Needless to say, in early 1997, Tyson, who was able to fund his own outlandish spending on his $30 million in boxing paydays, with no outlet of big money, found himself in a lot of debt, believe it or not, and owing the IRS $12 million. Matt, I'm sure, it's funny, isn't it? Because, I've read this after, but it made me think IRS and everything else. I'm surprised Vince didn't go, get me IRS back. Let's do an angle with Tyson at WrestleMania,
Oh, that would have been so bad.
It's the sort of thing that he would have done. At this point, it's reported that King made the deal with the WWF where Tyson would earn $3.5 million for both promoting and doing WrestleMania itself. As it turned out, Tyson did far less promoting than what was originally planned, but in the long run, the buy rate came in big with WWF was extremely happy. So, yeah, it's very